There we go.
Thank you. Okay, welcome everyone. Nice to see you, and thank you, Rabbi Professor, for the next shiur.
My pleasure. As I told you in our WhatsApp, יותר ממה שהעגל רוצה לינוק, הפרה רוצה להניק. Okay, as um, let's we were sort of doing a not so quiet, but a relaxed sort of a tour through various ways in which Jews adopted or adopted elements of Renaissance culture and what that meant. What we're going to do today and probably continue next week, because it's more of an involved discussion, but it's really, really important, not just to understand, um, not just to understand the what happened, several hundred years ago, but more importantly, the question of how Jews, especially rabbis, we saw this stuff with the dancing last week, how can you be so open to broader, cultural trends and maintain your integrity? Isn't that assimilation? The answer is I'm not going to say it depends on context. Forget I wouldn't survive that. But it depends on the dynamic and it depends on the circumstances, and that's really what I want to talk about. Because look, at ultimately, none of us, including people in Bnei Brak, dressed the way our ancestors did not 200 years ago, not 500 years ago, certainly not 1,000 years ago. So we're all influenced. But then the question becomes, how does influence work, and is it possible to interact with the broader culture without losing your own integrity? That the fear of losing one's integrity is what drives the sort of like isolationist impulse in Jewish society, which is not new. It's not just because the latest iterations of the Haredim. It's hardly a new impulse. In fact, the none other than the Rambam. In fact, it's actually worth before we even start. It's worth revisiting one passage in the Rambam which people don't, for some reason, people don't pay attention to it, and it's Chaval because it says a lot about the way society works, and here. Oh, sorry, it's not in Shuvah, it's in Deot. My mistake. The Rambam put at the beginning of the Mishnah Torah a section called Hilchot Deot, um, and one of the striking things about it is that he is that people don't here it is that people generally don't learn it. The word dayot is not clear what it means either. It doesn't mean opinions. It can mean moral qualities. It can mean a lot of things. And anyways, the Rambam says, and this is why, and I'm mentioning this in the context of Renaissance Italy. Derech briato shel adam. It's normal the way that people, the people are made. Liyot nimshach b'deotav uv'masav, to be attracted or to be drawn in his outlook and in his actions, his behavior. Acharei av v'chaverav. People are influenced by their society. They like to no people don't like to be different. They like to be like everybody else. Like a famous Monty Python line when Brian comes out and says, "You don't have to follow me. You don't have to follow anyone. You're all individuals." And they're all screaming, "We're all individuals." And one guy screams, "Not, I'm not." So he says that people don't want to be different. And then the Rambam says that therefore you have to when you pick the place where you're going to live, you got to be very careful. It's yes, it's true. It's about location, location, location. But location is not necessarily just a question of how close is it to the train. לפיכך צריך אדם להתחבר לצדיקים ולשב אצל החכמים תמיד. כדי שילמד ממעשיהם. You have to have good, and you have to check your neighbors. By the way, one of the I don't know if it's I don't know if it's true anymore, but it used to be in Israel that when you were looking for an apartment, the first thing you did before you looked at the apartment was you had to look at the was to say if you want to know if it's a good apartment, check the Chadar Madrigot, check the stairwell. If the stairwell is clean, it's an indication that the other neighbors take pride in their place and they'll and the general upkeep will be good and they're probably good people. Okay, fine. You have to pick good neighbors. Then he goes on. I'm going to skip a little bit. He says, what happens if you can't, if there's a place where the general comportment, the behavior of the people is bad, and the people aren't straight, you have to move to where they're at tzadikim. V'mayu kol hamedinot. Check this. V'mayu kol hamedinot shehu yodam. And if all of the countries of which he is aware, v'shomea shmuatam of which he has heard, noagim b'derech lo tova kemo zmanenu. If everywhere in the earth is horrible, like as in our times, he says you should cut yourself off and just go live by yourself. And he quotes the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, I'd be better off being in the desert. So my point is that there is the isolationist impulse. By the way, it's even in Maimonides. So you understand. So what is it? How you balance the two? We're going to get to that really very quickly. I just want to quickly go through these two slides. One of the striking things that you find throughout the Middle Ages is the fact that the Jewish communities were autonomous. They legislated not just sort of like halacha, but they also did see legislation. And one of the things you especially find in Italy is sumptuary laws. That people were really, they had money, and they were buying, here you have a few ordinances from the actually early in the Renaissance, from all of the Jewish communities in northern Italy got together at the city of Forlì, which is in Lombardy, and they passed a whole bunch of restrictions. So one of them is that men and women shouldn't wear very, very showy and very, very expensive clothing. Okay, not too much silk. You'll see what we have here, not too much silk and not too many and not ermine, because and certainly don't wear them outside on the street because the goyim are going to get upset. But there's also a problem with being too bourgeois, spending too much money on personal comfort, and obviously the implication is that the money could go for better things. And it's also not to be like the goyim. We'll get to that more. It even applies, and here this is the one I want to go look at. It especially applies to smachot. Who would know? You spend a lot of money on a simcha. Oh my God. For example, by the way, on the left-hand side, you have a picture of an illumination of an Italian wedding. There is no chuppah with 4 poles. They put a talus over the chos and kala. That's where the use of the talus over the chos and kala comes from. It serves as chuppah. They did not use 4 poles and a canopy the way that we have. The yekas to this day often will do that. In any case, look what he said. Look what he says in terms of inviting. I mean, my nephew is making a wedding next Thursday because his daughter is in the army. His prospective son-in-law is in the army, so they cut it down from a modest Israeli wedding where you invite, all of the great descendants of your kindergarten teacher of 800, not 1,000 people, which is a modest Israeli wedding, to they were only having 200 people. Now, my wedding was considered relatively, it was modest, but not whatever, and it was only 200 people. So 200 people is already like a compromise. In any case, look what concerns now. If you think about Renaissance spectacles, that you can see on TV or in movies. There's the famous movie about St. Francis of Assisi. You take a look at the kinds of parties that are shown in The Agony and the Ecstasy about Michelangelo. Or if you look at there's this Tudor revival going on Netflix or around, that they have all kinds of pictures of what these kind of parties went for. So Jews wanted to have parties like that. So look what in 1419 already they're writing. People making weddings and stam parties or perhaps wedding parties. Marchivim libam, they're overly generous. Umarbim lasot yoter midei choltam. First of all, they go into hak. They go into hak. By the way, this is a serious problem. I don't mean to be sarcastic. This is a serious problem in the Orthodox community in general and the Haredi community in particular. I mean, there was a famous satirical a song that was put out. I think it was Vegas. No, it wasn't Vegas. It was Journeys many years ago about the wedding song. The first thing you should know is is going into hak. He says they're going to more than they can afford. Goyim, they spend more than even rich goyim. Asher anachnu b'tocham. Question is, are they doing it because who are they looking? Who are they trying to keep up with? The Medici or the Mendelssohns? V'zesi ba'alev said mamon. It's a matter of losing money. V'lachein hiskamnu. All of the communities. This is not the rabbis like the previous one. Lachein hiskamnu she mitzeit yetziat zeh chodesh sivan kuf ayin chet from May or I guess late April May 1418 ad tashlum kol shnat kuf peitaf to kuf peivav until the end of until Elul 1426. Habalei lemema lo habalenu letova. Sorry, who may come to it for good. Lo yerashai shum Yehudi. It's interesting. They're using the word Yehudi and not Yuda and not Hebreo. So these apparently had a lot of either they wanted to say Yehudim or you have a lot of yekas here. Mitoshavei akilot and iskarot lazmin b'shum achat mimsudot hachuppah. Now you can't invite either for the wedding or for Sheva brachas. Rak esrim anashim. 20 men, Eser Nashim, 10 women, B'chamesh Narot Betulot, and 5 young girls, whether they are coming from outside of town or from town. Achein, now this is non-relatives. Achein akrovot, you can invite relatives till second cousins, inclusive. Third cousins. Second cousins, sorry. Bichlal. You can invite the mishpacha. You can invite up until third cousins or second cousins, but outsiders no more than what 25, 30 people. Okay. Gam yiskamnu, and we also declared or agreed that when it comes to a bris, lo yerashai shum yudim me'akilot and iskar lazmin besuda achat ki im ad asara nashim. You can invite a minion. 5 women, nosafim al krovav, in addition to the relatives. Okay, the same deal up to second cousins. Now, is this because the families were very big? It might be. It might also be because they knew there was a small number of relatives, and so on. Because you can't spend over much. Now, I'm going to add that there are other discussions in this is a long literature. There's other discussions where they restrict. Catch this! I'm sorry, I really should have made another slide. There is one ordinance that was put together later that if the kala is coming from out of town and she's coming down the river to the port, you're only allowed to meet her with an entourage of 10 horses, 10 Jewish horsemen with swords, accompanied by, whatever an entourage, no more than that, which is no more than that means it used to be more than that. Jews generally don't do that. Clearly, this is a Renaissance thing, but it was okay. It's fine. Now, the question is, why are they doing this? Are they doing this because this is what people do? Are they doing it because they're trying to show the Goyim that they can do whatever, Annie Oakley, anything you can do, I can do better. And how did that go down in among members of the community? It also shows there was a lot of money floating around. There's a lot of disposable money. Okay, we'll come back. I'm laying it out. Coming back to that. So okay, we talked about hunting last time. I'd like to also point out that this is an era in which a lot of the most beautiful art works of medieval illumination and manuscript illumination, and printing begins in the middle of the century. Hebrew printing becomes in the second half of the 15th century, and you begin to get woodcuts. And so, where do you get the models for the woodcuts? This is part of this. One of the leading school students of or scholars of medieval and illuminated manuscripts, Sharon Lieberman Mintz, one of her favorite topics when she speaks, and as well as my dear friend and colleague Professor Sarah Offenberg from Ben Gurion, is who did the illuminations? Are they Jews or are they non-Jews? Either way, it's very interesting. But either way, the one of the more important questions is if you take a motif from the outside world, it doesn't matter who's the source of it. The context is going to be a Jewish context. So then the question becomes, well, I'll give you an example here. See, this is a famous um, excuse me, this is a famous etching of, I think this is the Zaken in the Four Sons in the Prague Haggadah. You can see guys wearing a rabbi hat or whatever. Question is, where does it come from? Is it original or not? So some people claim that indeed this is taken straight from this is Jeremiah in the Sistine Chapel. Okay. Now, it's clear that this is I mean, that you can't, there's no question that the one is modeled on the other. It's the exact same pose, although an obverse. So it's an interesting question. So the Sistine Chapel was painted in the early 16th century. Again, Ayin Erech, see actually Agin the ecstasy. Now, does this mean that the artist wasn't Jewish and he adapted it? Was the artist Jewish and he had visited the Sistine Chapel? Sistine Chapel is a chapel. It's a church. It's the place where I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if Rodin's thinker came from there. That's a very good question. I don't know. I don't know. Did they used to go visit? Did they go into churches? Well, the truth of the matter is that there is the following. Let me see if I have it here. I hope I have it here. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. We'll come back. Just a minute. Oh, there it is. Oh, sorry. Sorry. You have, okay, you have this testimony. Now, one of the most important, here we go. One of the most important sources for Renaissance Renaissance what's the word Renaissance art is the lives of the 2-volume work, The Lives of the Painters by Vasari. Vasari was a student of Michelangelo. The book was probably written in the mid 16th century. And in his discussion of the Moses, which you see on the left-hand side, Michelangelo finished the Moses in marble, a statue of 5 braccia, unequaled by any modern or ancient work. He was a very big chassid of his Rebbe. Seated in a serious attitude, he rests with one arm on the tables and with the other holds his long, glossy beard. The hairs, so difficult to render in sculpture, being so soft and downy that it seems as if the iron chisel must have become a brush. Now, if you've ever seen the Moses, this is really true. The beautiful face, like that of a saint and a mighty prince, seems as one regards it to need the veil to cover it. So splendid and shining does it appear, and so well has the artist presented it in the marble that divinity has the artist presented in the marble the divinity with which God had endowed that holy countenance, namely Moshe Rabbeinu. The draperies fall in graceful folds. The muscles of the arms and bones of the hands are of such beauty and perfection, as are the legs. I don't know why that's a mistake. And knees. The feet being adorned with excellent shoes, and Moses may now be called the friend of God more than ever, since God has permitted his body to be prepared for the resurrection before the others by the hand of Michelangelo. Oh, it's as if, in other words, Moshe Rabbeinu is going to emerge from this statue. And then, as a throwaway, he tells us The Jews still go every Saturday in troops to visit and adore it as a divine, not a human thing. What he's telling us, just by the way, now this apparent, the ghettos in Rome were instituted around 1555. But even so, this description may have predated the establishment of the ghetto. However, Jews did live more or less in the same area in the Trastevere. So it's more or less in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of geography. Why am I mentioning this? What's he basically saying? He's saying that in the summer, the winter it's too short. In the summer, when the Jews go for an after lunch spazier, they walk to the church of the La Chiesa de San Pietro in Vincoli, the church of St. Peter in Chains, which is not far, really not very far from the Colosseum, to look at the Moses. That's the spazier, and then they go back. That's the spazier. So in other words, so what do you see from this? You see from this that the Jews are looking at art in the churches because if you've been to if you've been to San Pietro and Vincoli, you know that when you go into I'm giving myself away here. When you go into the church, in front of you is the altar, where underneath are the chains that are reputed to have been the chains of Saint Peter, and to the right, and the Moses on the right hand side of the altar. One of the more interesting shilas that arises in such situations is it's very dark in there. And in order to be able to see the Moses during the week, you have to chuck in I think it's €1 or half a euro, and then this light goes on, and you can see the statue better. The problem is that big mahana of Odazara. So I was discussing this with a friend of mine. And he says, "Well, if you didn't go in the churches, you wouldn't have the Shiloh." I said, "That's true, but I wouldn't see the Moses." In any event, the it's a Jew. He's reporting that Jews used to go. So if this description is correct, and there recently was an article that was published that questions the veracity of the report. But the truth of the matter is, this added little doodad has absolutely nothing. Doesn't add anything to the description of the Moses, which is what the whole thing was about. So knowing Italian Jews, I have absolutely no trouble assuming that they were familiar with the Moses, and they have no problem with the idea that they knew that somebody went to see the Sistine Chapel. Now, if you're Rabbi Benny Black, so you know that you can you can make the argument that the whole Sistine Chapel is a Jewish conspiracy, but I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go there. In any event, so if this is really, you're talking about a very flexible kind of attitude towards outside culture. What does this achieve? So there were two questions, both of which are attitudinal, which are necessary in order to be able to understand what made it possible, if to the degree that it was possible, what made it possible for Jews to be open to really clearly adopt ideas and images and motifs and actions from the outside world without worrying about it. So the first question is a shaila, which I first did by the 15th century leading posek, Rabbi Yosef Kolon, on who I wrote my doctorate. I see Fred's here, so I'm just gonna say that he doesn't remember this, but when I tried out for Lincoln Square, this was my Shabbos afternoon sheer part of this. I say the article that came off of this discussion, I am proud to say, is one of the three major pieces of mine that were highlighted by my teacher, Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, in his own published writings. So what I'm about to say has sort of like an indirect imprimatur from him. Okay. The story here is as follows. The picture here is from the 1519 Venice edition by Bomberg of his Chuvot. Colon was a French Ashkenazi rabbi who really was the preeminent post for Italy, and actually had a massive impact on Polish halacha as well. He lived between 1420 1480, apparently. Although I'm working on a book now, and I'm juggling with the dates. In any event, the action that we're discussing took place apparently in 1469, 1470. In other words, it's around the same time as the same story with our friend Falcone Cohen, the innkeeper. Okay, in 1469, 1470, the one of Colon's leading colleague among Italian rabbis was a man whose name was Judah ben Yechiel Messer Leon. He was Italiano. In other words, he was really from Italian stock. And he was a really, what they used in Hebrew, they called him a Chacham HaKolel, a multifaceted wise man, which is the Hebrew translation of a concept which was then beginning to get traction among Italian Christian intellectuals, and un uomo universale, a universal person. We would call a Renaissance man. He was a Rav. He had a yeshiva in Ancona. He was a rhetorician, a master of the humanities. He wrote a book about the rhetorical relationship between the Bible and the great rhetoricians Quintilian and Cicero. And in fact, his book, which is called Nofet Sufim, was the first Hebrew book to be published in the life of the author. And he was a well-known doctor. Now, in those days, Jews were not allowed to go to medical school. It was much later Jews were allowed to go to medical school. One of the first Jews to go allowed to go to a non-Jewish medical school was Ovadia Sforno, the Bible scholar. And even then, it was somewhat begrudging. People wanted Jewish doctors; they didn't want to let them into medical school. We have a copy, interestingly, of Sforno's diploma that he got from the University of Bologna. He was from Bologna itself. But the University of Bologna, which, by the way, the second language at the University of Bologna to this day in the medical school is, anybody know? Hebrew, because that's where Israelis go when they can't get into Israeli medical school. In any event, a lot of historians who like to think that Jews were like accepted as equals and everybody loved each other in Italy at the time, love to point out that he was a graduate of the University of Bologna. Except when you read I have a copy of it here in Judaica Menorah. When you read the thing, it says, "We had hoped that Ovadia Sforno would finally see the light and leave the shadows and darkness and superstitions of the Jews and enter into the light of our Lord Jesus." Blah, 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 blah. However, he refuses to do that. He consists on being a Jew. However, he also finished medical school. So, despite our, I mean, I'm being dramatic, but basically, nevertheless, so we have to give him a degree. So that's not something from the United Council of Christians and Jews. I mean, that's sort of like it tells you a lot about the kind of interaction that went on between the two. In any event, so Jews went, but that's about 50, 60 years later. The way that Jews learned how to be doctors is it was like an apprenticeship. In other words, if you went to a master doctor, you want to be a doctor, so you go and you apprentice yourself to a doctor, and then you become a master, and then you become a journeyman rather, and then you become a master, and if you find somebody who's a master doctor, they'll give you your certification. You can be a doctor out, not having gone to medical school. Very few Jews were allowed to give that final sort of hechsher. In 1469, the Holy Roman Emperor gave Messer Leon, he knighted him. Messer means he was a sir, he was knighted, and gave him the right to certify Jewish doctors. And now among the things that this allowed him, aside from being a master of the dragon and covet and so on, it allowed him to wear an academic robe, apparently, which was unique to doctors. So Messer Leon apparently was very proud of this. I mean, I'm gonna fill in some, but apparently what happened was that he once he got the appointment in 1469, he got to put on his robes and he went to go daven mincha. So he walks into shul, and apparently him wearing these robes in shul did not go down well. And that led, there was a big tumult in the shul, and that led him to seek. He says it's mutter, it's mutter, it's mutter, and they're saying it's goyish, it's goyish, it's goyish. And one of the members of the community in Bologna was a man whose name was Shmuel Modena. Shmuel Modena was a cousin or an uncle of Yehuda Aryeh Modena, whom we'll speak to in the last session. And he says, my Rebbe, my Rick, write him, because he has nobody's ever going to suspect him of being involved in secular studies, and see what he says is mutter tzasik. So Marik, he writes to Marik, and Marik writes back. Sarei alafim b'sarei meyot, you the master, ministers of, or lords, or ministers of thousands and hundreds. Sar tzvaot Yisrael, he's giving him a lot of praise. Harav Rabbeinu, our Rabbi Messer Leon, V'yedid Nafshi, and my close friend, Hachaver Rabbi Shmuel. He was not a Rav, he was a Chaver. That used to be in the yeshivot, in the Ashkenazi yeshivot in the Middle Ages, up until actually the 16th century, 17th century. There were 2 degrees or 2 titles you got. When you finished your basic education, so like a BA, you were deemed to be a chaver. The Yekes later made this into like an honorary thing where you give to accomplished lay people. But here it was really, if you spent X number of years in yeshiva, and you were considered to be a person of Talmudic accomplishment, you got the title chaver. Then you studied a little longer, and if you studied Yeridei, studied Kashrus, whatever, you became Moreno Harav or Malata Rav. But in this case, this is a student who only finished whatever. Chaver Rabbeinu Shmuel, this is Modena, Shalom. Shalom Rav. Ra'o ra'iti tivrechem. Okay, see what you wrote. I'm going to have to write briefly. By the way, it's a very long tshuva. He was one of the most. He was one of the most. I once did a. I once did. He was before Rav Yosef, who was the longest writer, I think, in rabbinic history. He was one of the most long-winded writers on, but it's all right. Shortly, the Shnei Tamim. There are 2 reasons why I'm going to be brief. Rishon, first of all, they apparently wrote him a brief, which was enough to be able to solve the problem. Secondly, he was running a yeshiva. That was his parnasa. Was he apparently got involved with he also apparently did some loan banking on the side, but basically he was hired to run a yeshiva in Mantova apparently at this time. But maybe told medrash karasher anu lomdim ata sugya when a very difficult sugya, and bechaverat chaverim makshibim mitnadim lechatet ragleihem lilmod lamed Torah. There, it's a big thing, and if I'm not there, I mean, they're paying me to teach them, and I can't spend a lot of time on the tshuva. Ulam, however, I'll write you a quick opinion. A little bit here, a little bit there, with regard to the kappa, which you described. Now, what kappa is a cape, a capuchon? It's a cape with a hood. And what did it look like? He aruka ad la'aretz. It goes down all the way down to the ground. V'holechet panim v'achor. Back and forth, like a sandwich board. In other words, this is not an academic gown the way that we know, where you put it on and it closes in the front. Rather, apparently, at a hole in the middle, it flapped back and forth. Okay, and it's open at the sides. Maybe it was belted. V'omnam, and it apparently was squared at the bottom. Because he adds, tikun hagun lihiyot p'tura mitzitzit. So it seems what they did was, I'm going to assume that they rounded one of the corners, and that patters the beged from tzitzis. The imamu aleha. La'amem is to murmur, to carry on sort of a smear campaign. Some people, and I'm sure there's more than just a few people, wearing such a beged is a violation of the Torah says explicitly, don't go the ways of the goyim. Now, why would you think so? Because we know what doctors wore. This is a Jewish doctor. It's an image from around, a picture, an illumination from around the same time. Notice he's wearing red. with a yellow collar, and he's looking at a specimen. They may have pointed in the bottle, making sure that making sure that the contents of the bottle are yellow. Okay. And here you have another picture of another a Jewish doctor from the north, from Piemonte, and he's also wearing a closed garment. He's got red in his hat, and green. Green, of course, is always a. If I may be wrong, but I think to this day in America, in American medical schools, I think the doctor's hood is green. It used to be, anyways, and that's just, that may be an anticipation here. All right. So that neither of these, this is one of the cool parts of doing this kind of research. You get to see what these things look like. Neither of these doctors are wearing anything that sounds anything like what Marik described. Till we get to this. This is taken from a book which describes Christian or Catholic clerical garb from the High Middle Ages. This is a deacon's robe. Notice it fits exactly it fits exactly the description of the Marik. Notice you put it over your head. All right, so it has sleeves. It has a capuchon. It has a hood in the back. It's not a halo, that's a hood. And then it splits on the side. It has slit in the side, and it's squared. Okay, so this is called a capa manicata. A capa manicata means it's missing something because it's cut out on the sides, as opposed to what you have on both sides called a capa clausa, a closed capa. After which, by the way, our academic gowns are modeled today. Okay. Now, if you look at this, you begin to understand why there was a big tumult in Shul, because Catholic clergy people, this is of a deacon, but it doesn't matter. Catholic clergymen walked around, not with all of the gowns that they wore in during service, but they walked around with these things. You didn't have to go to church to know that this is what a galach wore. This is what a churchman wore. And all of a sudden, this rabbi comes into shul. All right, fine. So one of the corners is rounded. He's dressed like a galach. Says, "What are you wearing? What is the matter with you?" And you want to go for the yomad, you say the yard side. What are you talking about? What is this? So that was where. Seemingly this should be an open and shut case. Let me put it this way: it's well known that there's a famous. I actually, if you just Google it, you can do it yourselves. Google a picture. Google put in a Google for a picture of either Reb Shamshon of Fall Hirsch or Rabbi Nathan Adler, who was the chief rabbi of the British Empire, and you'll see that both Reb Shamshon of Fall Hirsch and Rabbi Nosson Adler, who's by the way tremendous Talmud Chacham, he wrote a famous. Natan Adler, he wrote a famous commentary on the Targum called Netina Leger. Their formal pictures have them wearing Protestant clerical collars. Okay, now I don't know they handled it then, but I know that if Rav were to walk into, I don't care what shul today, wearing a clerical collar. Oh, that's even better. For some crazy reason, some rabbi decided that it's more mechubed to wear a Roman collar. You know, a Roman collar that's the thing that the Catholic priests wear with the little thingy jobby. And you say, "Oh, I just got a present from the Pope. He made me the chief rabbi of the world, and he told me I should wear this." I'm guarantee you. I mean, the front page of Ami magazine, he's not going to be on. Okay, or the Mishpacha Batuach. And so, but he walks in with this. So the question is, whoa, so what's going to be the deal? Oh, so I'm not going to go through the whole sheer in terms of the lumdus because it's really not relevant right now. Let's see what Marik says. I should just tell you, because I only have 5 minutes late. Anyways, we'll finish next week. I should just tell you that there were basically two, up until, if this is 1469, there were two Shitos HaRishonim. There were two Rishonic opinions that on the issue of what is considered to be, when the Torah said, what did it mean? The Ran, Rabbeinu Nisim, argues that the prohibition is restricted to anything which is absolutely associated with avodah zarah. Okay, it's a prohibition of ritual behavior on a broad scale that is derived clearly from avodah zarah. Okay, based on that, one could argue away. This is, on the one hand, this is a beged that it's derived from a Christian beged, but it's from a Christian garment, but it is used by doctors. Okay, so you have to question whether it's attenuated or not. So the position of the Ran, which is considered to be the more lenient position, is one. Tosfos, based on a correlation of two parallel sugyas on the issue, says that there are two. It's before Rab Chaim. There are two subsections there are two halachas. There are two subsections of the prohibition against imitating goyim. Things which are quintessentially religious. Okay, they derive from avodah zarah, in our case, Christianity, and they have religious significance. And B, something which is goyish. That's sort of like an open-ended category. He says things that are quintessentially goyish. They're minag shtus. They're things that which no Jew would do. It's a very open-ended thing. In other words, he's very machmir. Tosfos on this issue is incredibly machmir. Does it say anything about the attitude of the Ran versus Tosfos, the outside world? It's another story. There, in fact, was there's a book that was written on the topic of what are the parameters of Chukoteim Lo Telechu. It was published by a woman who did a doctorate at JTS about it. Well, it's BC. It's before Corona, so 5-6 years ago. I remember with some satisfaction. The author devotes an entire chapter to trying to undermine my analysis, and she couldn't do it, so she finally agreed that I was right, which is very rare. In any case, so those are the two possibilities. So under the aegis of the Ran, you have a large possibility it might be usher, or you could actually maybe finesse it. Tosfos, of whom the Marik claimed to be the continuer, right? Right. Says no. Says absolutely under no circumstances. What does Marik say? Lanio dati. Okay, so I'm not gonna read it inside. He says as follows. He says that there are basically two criteria, and he does this based on it's a striking thing. He bases this on an independent analysis of psukim and chumash, and he uses Rashi's and Ramban's commentaries on the Bible to make a halachic point, which is methodologically very unusual. There's a big debate among poskim whether Rashi intended his Perush and Chumash to be a halachic source. Most poskim think not, because in many cases Rashi interprets Chumash against the accepted psak and Torah Shebal Peh because it fits the words better. Well, we will get to the shrine. I'm going to make a note of talking about the shrine. We have to work out the. All right, we're running out of time. We have to work out the conceptual analysis first. But first, he says something. So he says stage number one is something which is, I don't know what to call it. He says something which is meta-rational or irrational, something which is impregnated with religious significance, and which one only does as a sign of the acceptance of a religion. So lahavdil, we do chukim because, as Rashi, with the way Rashi has it, it's a sign of our submission to God. And really, they have no, and according to Rashi, they have no rational interpretations against the Rambam. Okay, they have no rational reason. We do it because God said that's what you do. It's different. It's unique. Goodbye. Interestingly, we only make brachas on chukim, but something else to think about. Lahav the level Abdallah, says the Rab, says the Marik. Same thing over here. If there is something which is really kind of bizarre, something which is strange, something which a person would normally do, and he does it in a religious mode, then that shows that the only reason they'll do that, that's what he says at the end, Shekeban Show said, Davar Mishuneh, Sherein Botam Nigled, there's no obvious reason for doing it. Ella Shehem no Agimke, except that's why the reason they do it, as Niravada Kinim Shachar Modelem, that they're doing it as an act of allegiance to that religion. Okay, so that's number one. If you'll just let me give me an extra minute, so we can just finish the second criterion. He says the second criterion, which he bases on a Sifrei and which actually runs to the Rambam. He says another thing which is something which is immodest, not immodest like skirts, something which is bombastic, something which is arrogant, something which is showy. He says Jews are supposed to be modest. They're not supposed to put on big bar mitzvahs where you have 40,000 people in a stadium and you bring the bar mitzvah boy in a helicopter. This is absolute. That's what is prohibited, because that's what Jews do. That's what Jews do. It's not what Jews do, rather. Okay. If Jews do that, since it goes against their better nature, then that shows that they're trying to keep up with the Joneses. In other words, that when you mimic the way that non-Jews act in public, it's a sign of wanting to be accepted and you're taking the outside world as your point of reference and evaluation. I evaluate myself and my behavior in terms of what they do. He says, and therefore, because I want to be like them. In other words, it's a fundamentally assimilationist, I'm using an anachronism, assimilationist impulse in which I'm taking the outside world as my criterion for validity. Okay. And then he comes on and says, you know what? When you think about it, both of these criteria are the same. Because if you mimic a non-Jew, or what non-Jewish society does in terms of their comportment, or the way what kind of cars they drive, or what kind of parties they throw, or what kind of whatever it is, because you want to imitate them and be taken for a non-Jew, you want to make it, you want to be accepted. The same thing is true what we said about the ritual stuff. Why would I do these things? Because I want to be accepted by them. I want to do what they do because my frame of reference is them, not me. In other words, so underlying both of these criteria is a fundamentally outer-directed assimilationist impulse. Now, where does that leave us with the kappa? He says, and we're going to come back to this, and this paragraph is going to be very important for understanding the entire influence thing. Okay, he says very simple, and this with those close. He says people don't wear this. I don't care where it comes from. Nobody wears this thing, this jacket, this robe, because they want to be taken as a goy, or because they want to be like goy. They want to be taken as an expert surgeon, like in Israel. The senior doctors are all professors. So the same thing. Oh, that's a sign of those senior doctor. Same over here. He's not doing it for that. He wants. It's like he says. He compares it to a sandwich board. Okay, you remember used to be on all cartoons. There was a guy walking around in the cartoon with a sandwich board. Eat at Joe's. You walk around and you go to Joe's and you have lunch. So same thing over here. You're wearing this thing. Why are you wearing this thing? Because you want people to know that you're a good doctor and people will come to you. And for what Fred said is absolutely correct, that the Jews in Egypt maintain their dress names and language. But here, this is a professional thing. He's creating the category of professionals, and that is not included. Okay. There's a lot more to that, but we'll see this. We'll continue this next week because it has a lot of implications for contemporary culture as well. And with that, we will see you, Mirz Hashem, in 2024.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Fascinating. We'll see you next week, Bezrat Hashem.